What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and Happy New Year. Happy 2026. 2025 has drawn to a close. We've survived another year, you guys, which means it's time for me to do my annual ranking of all the new films that I watched this year. Now, I will say right out the gate that 2025 was kind of a middling year for films, in my opinion, at least of the ones that I've seen. I've seen approximately 21, as you will see, and I didn't find any of these to be as spectacular as the best of the last few years. For the last 3 to 5 years, I've had at least one 9 out of 10 by the end of the year. My highest rated film of this year, or last year I suppose, is only an 8 out of 10, which should tell you how I feel about a lot of these films. I will say I don't think there were any truly abysmally bad films other than like maybe the bottom 2 on this list. A lot of them were just kind of average, okay, and there were a few really good to great films that came out. To be honest, the real triumphs of this year were on the TV front with Andor Season 2 and The Bear Season 4. I don't think any of the films this year reached the heights of those seasons of television, but there were a lot of films this year that brought me some of my favorite cinematic moments of 2025. So, I'm going to stop rambling and get started with the list. Now at the very bottom of my list, at number 21, is Jurassic World Rebirth. Now, I don't know how the Jurassic Park franchise keeps re-killing itself, but hopefully it stays dead this time, because I don't know how many times we as audience members can pay to watch the same film over and over and over again. I will say I had a fun time watching this movie with my roommate at the drive-in, laughing at how stupid it was, poking all the plot holes in it, making fun of the ridiculous plot armor on display, especially in the sequence with the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The T-Rex-proof raft is now one of the peak comedic gold moments of 2025, but it is kind of sad to see how much this franchise has deteriorated over the years. Any semblance of the suspense or simple but engaging storytelling that the original film was known for is completely gone. This is the epitome of a hollow film. It's like a skeleton with no meat on its bones, despite the creative team having access to every tool imaginable to make a decent movie. Gareth Edwards has an eye for spectacle. The creator and Rogue One more than prove that. We've got Scarlett Johansson and Jonathan Bailey, actors who have proven themselves to be incredibly talented. But this film has no respect for their talent, let alone the intelligence of the audience. The longer it went on, the more that its cynical derivative nature became blatantly apparent to me. And it's films like this that I believe are slowly killing the film industry. At number 20, I've got a Minecraft movie. Now, this film is terrible, and everyone knows that at this point, so it doesn't bear repeating. What I will say, however, is I did find it hilarious, for both ironic and somewhat unironic reasons. Here's the thing, I absolutely adore Napoleon Dynamite. It's probably one of my favorite comedies of all time. So, the same director, Jared Hess, stepping in to direct this film, brought with it a few homages and similar stylistic touches that put a smile on my face. I'll admit that. Once things start going in the Minecraft world, it kind of loses me, though. But it wasn't nearly as bad as I was expecting it to be. I'm certainly not anticipating any continuation of this. If anything, the sequels will probably be worse. I'm not exactly happy that this film exists, but it also didn't offend me either. And at number 19 is the Fantastic Four: First Steps. Now, a lot of people have been praising this film, saying that it's one of the best Marvel movies in years, but all I saw was more MCU mediocrity. A problem that I've had with a lot of recent Marvel films, this year in particular, is the strangely short run times. Every Marvel film this year has come in at around 2 hours, if not slightly less than that, which hampers my investment in the story and the characters, especially in this film, where they want me to care about the incredibly high stakes of their world potentially coming to an end and their child's life being on the line. But we spend so much time focused on them isolated from the rest of the world that I didn't feel much when shit hits the fan. It kind of undercuts the messaging of the film that everyone is meant to be a huge family, but I didn't feel much of a connection between anyone. The thing that really saves this film is Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm, providing a fresh take on this character that differs from Chris Evans' interpretation of the Human Torch. Rather than being a goofy dumbass, he's actually kinda smart, proving to be a pivotal part of the plan by the end of the film. His connection with the Silver Surfer was also kind of interesting, one of the better aspects of the story, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, this entire film feels pointless because there is no change in the status quo. Our team has a new Deus Ex Machina baby that reverses the only stakes present in the entire story, and all's good. This movie just didn't do much for me. Moving right along to number 18, I have How to Train Your Dragon, the 2025 live-action remake of the 2010 animated classic. And I will admit, this is undeniably better than most, if not all, of Disney's attempts at recreating their old animated films. Because there are minor tweaks to the story here that help it fit into the overall trilogy a little bit better, and minor details that improve certain characters. However, there are crucial details which are removed, making it considerably weaker than the original film. I didn't have a negative experience watching this movie. It was fun seeing it on the big screen, hearing John Powell's iconic score again blasting through the cinema speakers, but it hasn't left much of a lasting impact on me at all, because at the end of the day, it's still an inferior version of a movie that I absolutely adore. If I ever want to rewatch this film, I'll just go watch the 2010 one. And coming in at number 17 is The Last Supper, a name that speaks for itself, and the only reason I wanted to watch this movie is because of the comedic irony of Jamie Ward, who played Father Gomez, a religiously zealous priest assassin guy in his Dark Materials, as Jesus Christ himself. But to my surprise, his performance was actually pretty convincing. There are a lot of good performances in this film from pretty unknown actors. I will say the story of Judas and his betrayal of Jesus is like super cheesy. They've got a serpent whispering in his ear like Voldemort, which was really strange. I was like, what's going on here? But aside from that cheesiness and goofy creative choices, I did find this to be a decent film. It's well made, well acted, kinda hard to complain about. Nothing fantastic by any means, but compared to a lot of terrible biblical adaptations out there, like Noah from 2013, God, what the hell were they thinking with that film? It does stand out. And at number 16, I have Captain America Brave New World, which I may have tricked people into thinking that I absolutely loved or something based on my original review, because this is a messy movie. It is by no means a great work of art, but I had a good time watching it, despite being heavily flawed due to an overabundance of reshoots and reworking in post-production. It was more coherent and enjoyable than I expected. What I appreciated most about it is that the characters' stories from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier are continued fairly well. The characterization of Sam Wilson in particular remains consistent, which is what mattered most to me. And for those reasons, it stands out among many of the MCU's recent endeavors. And moving on to number 15, I have Thunderbolts, another Marvel movie that people were telling me for months was great. And although I don't love this as much as any of the people who recommended it to me, I still liked it a lot. This is probably the best MCU movie in a while. Shockingly so, because the characters here are actually decent and have believable chemistry on screen. I'm still not a big fan of how John Walker was characterized in lieu of his development in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Unfortunately, he does sustain a small amount of character assassination. However, this movie actually presents some creative sequences for once in a Marvel movie. There's like a trippy mental torture chamber sequence that happens in the third act, which kind of blew my mind because it was actually cool and the MCU doing something interesting for once. Now, this doesn't mean I'm anticipating what comes next. Definitely not in Avengers Doomsday or whatever, because there has been such minimal buildup. But for what it is, this movie succeeds. At number 14 is F1, the movie. The most ultra-cheesy 80s, 90s action movie you could possibly imagine releasing in the 2020s. It's got all the cliches you'd expect, but it's hella entertaining. As much as I'm still not a big fan of Top Gun Maverick, Joseph Kosinski knows what he's doing. The man is skilled at delivering blockbusters just as smooth as the Formula One race cars that we see Brad Pitt driving in this film. Kosinski actually makes better use of the supporting cast in this film than he did in Maverick. They actually feel like they've got something to do, and it did have a message, as superficial as it may be. This movie's not gonna be winning a ton of awards or getting on any charts, but it's a good time. But moving right along, we have a film that some people may count as a 2024 release, but it did not release here in Canada until 2025. And it's my list, so I'm going to do what I want. At number 13, I have Paddington in Peru, which is undeniably weaker than its two predecessors, but to be fair, Paddington 2 did set an incredibly high bar, and this is still a very sweet and endearing film. Antonio Banderas and Olivia Colman were fantastic additions to the cast. The recast of Mrs. Brown is a tad bit distracting, but not to the extent that it ruined the story for me, and she still did a pretty good job. The funniest thing about this film, in my opinion, is how similar the plot is to The Hobbit. I mean, we've got a small, well-mannered British fellow embarking on a quest to find long-lost treasure accompanied by someone descended from royalty who is suffering from a gold-induced illness. I don't know, I can't help but feel like they took a few quick glances at Tolkien's work while writing the script for this film. At number 12, I have Elio, the most recent Pixar film, and I have been one of the most avid defenders of Pixar's recent output. I really liked Turning Red, Luca, of course, Inside Out too, but I think a lot of people have been unfairly harsh towards those films, and while I can't deny this is considerably weaker than Inside Out 2, it's still just really sweet. The characters are likable, the animation is obviously fantastic, with a lot of cute character designs, and the family dynamic that this movie explores actually felt kinda unique compared to a lot of family films. This woman having adopted her nephew after her sister died in, like, a car accident is not only pretty mature for the target demographic this film is made for, but it's also an interesting take on the complicated family relationship trope that we see being touched upon in a lot of animated films these days. And at the 11th spot on my list is One Battle After Another, the newest Paul Thomas Anderson film that I actually just watched today as I am recording this video, so my feelings on it are pretty fresh, and I liked this movie a lot, although the runtime is a bit of a tough pill to swallow. It kind of took me a while to get into the groove of this film. The tone can be a little bit off-putting, even more so than his last film, Licorice Pizza, but it was just funny watching Leo DiCaprio flopping around pathetically trying to save his daughter. And there are some legitimately impressive instances of filmmaking in this movie, especially during a car chase scene towards the end of the film, where the suspense just continues to build. That was peak cinema, for lack of a better term. Maybe this film will grow on me as the years go on, or maybe I'll forget about it. Only time will tell. But bringing us into the top 10 is The Phoenician Scheme, which I actually bumped down a little bit from its original placement on this list, because it hasn't stuck with me as much as I hoped it would. But I still think it is one of Wes Anderson's best films in recent years. What elevates it above some of his recent works is the moral at the heart of the story and the cast. Benicio del Toro plays this insane tycoon guy who felt very Trumpian, but to be honest, the standout was Mia Threepleton, the daughter of Kate Winslet, who, as far as I know, is fairly new to the film scene, but she was kind of the sleeper star of this movie, and her rapport with Del Toro and Michael Cera was a lot of fun to watch. I also think that Anderson's sensibilities as a director matched the material much better than films like Asteroid City or The French Dispatch, meaning that the humor, which comes from his creative choices, worked a lot more. But coming in at number 9, I have Sinners. Yes, I know, guys, please don't crucify me. Hear me out. The acting here is top-notch. Ryan Coogler's direction is obviously fantastic. The music and thematically rich storytelling. It has everything I could possibly ask for from a modern film. But I just don't get it. I just don't get the hype. Because this may just be me, but I can't help but feel a disconnect between the two main aspects of this movie. It's like it has two modes. One is a goofy vampire horror movie, and the other is a serious commentary on the suppression of black communities and the historical significance of the blues era. It's safe to say I liked the music mode a lot more than the goofy vampire mode. There's this incredible scene where the camera pans through this building and we see every different era of music coming together. As a music student, that was such a cool thing to witness. But there was a certain tonal dissonance that I couldn't get past, which prevented this movie from hitting me emotionally the way that it has so many people. And that's okay. I'm sure that my appreciation for it will grow as time goes on. But for the time being, it receives this spot on my 2025 list. But coming in at number 8 is Wake Up Dead Man, Rian Johnson's newest whodunit, which once again proves to be a highly entertaining murder mystery, which does take a while to get off the ground, similar to my experience with The Glass Onion a few years back, but it really gets going in the second act. Josh O'Connor is amazing here. I would love to see more of him as an actor in future. It was really nice to see Thomas Hayden Church again, because I don't think I've seen him in a film since, 2019 in The Peanut Butter Falcon, and no, that crappy Spider-Man movie doesn't count because he was a blob of CGI. But the supporting cast here is really strong, as it typically is in these Knives Out movies, and this is a more substantive film than perhaps either of the prior ones because of its commentary on corrupt organized religion and the way that those religious beliefs collide with Daniel Craig's Benoit Blanc, who is pretty much an atheist and remains steadfast in that belief over the course of the film. However, there is a but. And that is that I completely forgot The Glass Onion. Despite loving it when it came out, you guys will probably remember it was at number 4 on my 2022 list, but today, I wouldn't be able to tell you anything that happened in it, which may be due to how dated a lot of the references were in it, and its commentary wasn't nearly as universal as this film's commentary on organized religion, but I can't escape this feeling that Knives Out was just a lightning-in-a-bottle movie that can't quite be recaptured the same way again. So I have preemptively given this film a lower grade and spot on this list than I initially wanted to, because if The Glass Onion completely disappeared from my memory, perhaps this film will suffer the same fate. At number 7, I have Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which I've already talked about at great length this year, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. Despite being ever so slightly disappointing compared to the last few movies in the series, it still delivers some of the highest points in this franchise, quite literally. The action sequences here are as impressive as they have ever been, and it not only has my most listened to musical score of the year, I can prove this for a fact, Spotify told me, but it also has some of my favorite individual moments to come out of the medium of film in 2025. Unfortunately, films are not just scenes that exist in isolation, and you do have to sift through quite a bit of not great stuff to find the diamond in the rough. At number 6, I have a fun little surprise. The pro shot for Merrily We Roll Along. Now, whether or not this counts as a 2025 movie could be debated, but Letterboxd counts it as such. However, it didn't count the Hamilton Pro Shot that I also watched this year, which is kind of a good thing because Hamilton would top this list easily, no questions asked. But I'd never seen the original musical, so this was a fun experience watching it in theaters with my friends. I certainly was not expecting a Christopher Nolan Memento-style, non-linear storytelling structure, but I'm not complaining. The music here is decent, but I don't think it's nearly as strong as some of Stephen Sondheim's other musicals. What really stuck with me here were the performances. Jonathan Groff is an icon, and I had no idea that Harry Potter could sing this well, but Daniel Radcliffe delivers here. I also really liked what this story had to say about achieving your dreams and the true destructiveness that comes with success. An issue that some of my friends had with this is how they really primed this for a film-going audience. They edited it like a movie, so it's very zoomed in on everyone, and you can't see the stage, which deprives some of the musical quality of the original production. But as a film goer myself, rather than a huge musical fan, not to say that I don't enjoy a fair share of musicals, I didn't mind. But bringing us into my top 5 favorite movies of 2025 is perhaps my biggest surprise of the year: Superman. Look, James Gunn and I have a complicated relationship. I'll admit, I haven't seen his Suicide Squad movie or the Peacemaker show. I've heard good things. I'm just not that interested. Of his 3 Guardians of the Galaxy films, the only one that really stands out to me is Volume 2. That's probably my favorite film in the MCU franchise, but I can take it or leave it when it comes to 1 and 3. However, I do think he is the right guy to take on this kind of goofy comic book material. He takes it seriously to the extent that I can become invested in these characters and the world, but simultaneously pokes fun at the absurdity of it all without ever feeling overly satirical in nature. David Corenswet, who's an actor I was completely unfamiliar with before this film, kinda blew me away by delivering what is quite possibly my favorite interpretation of this character ever. There is just a genuine optimism and sincerity to this movie that warms my heart. It has a legitimately good message, which is reinforced by the script. It wears its heart on its sleeve. It's not subtle by any means. A lot of it is pretty cheese, but it just works for me in a way that almost all of superhero media doesn't these days. At number 4, I have Frankenstein, which I have heard people describing as a perfect combination of material and director, which I could not agree more with. This film is dripping with attention to detail, visual symbolism, the acting, score, and stylistic choices all perfectly suit the narrative as it's being told in this film. Guillermo del Toro is a very odd director whose choices I don't always find the most compelling. I haven't enjoyed all of his films, but I loved what he did with Pinocchio a few years back, and this film delivers on every level that I needed it to. Despite being oppressively dour and grim almost throughout the entire runtime, this film still finds a way to end on a poignantly hopeful note, showing the true value of forgiveness and moving forward. And kicking off the top 3 is Wicked for Good. Now, this may be the recency bias talking, but I've legitimately come to love the first Wicked film. I've watched it 5 times over the last year, and I think it is a genuine classic. So, I knew this film would in no way top it. Combine that with the somewhat mixed reviews I heard once it released, I leveled my expectations. And this film delivered exactly what I wanted. It's not nearly as polished or satisfying as a singular experience, but it's still a pretty neat conclusion to this story, both thematically meaningful and clearly told with passion and respect for the source material, rather than coming from a place of cynicism, which is so uncommon these days. As I've said, this is by no means a perfect film. It doesn't have as many memorable songs. It's not as strong from a script perspective, nor is it paced as well as the previous film, despite it being considerably shorter. But compared to so much of what we get nowadays, this feels like a masterpiece. But in second place is Springsteen Deliver Me From Nowhere, a film that I'm just as surprised as you are ended up this high on my list. And that's because it really struck me for not being your typical musical biopic, an all-encompassing look at a musician's life. Instead, this film chooses to focus in on a very specific time for Bruce Springsteen, a time that was clearly life-changingly transformative for him. Jeremy Allen White is phenomenal here. I had no doubt of that after watching him in The Bear for 4 straight seasons, but his transition into this role wasn't quite as seamless as Timothée Chalamet's into the role of Bob Dylan in last year's A Complete Unknown, but he won me over almost immediately. And this film forgoes the typical structure of these historical biopics by going to some terrifyingly realistic places. We actually get to see Springsteen's tremendously complicated relationship with his father and how that manifested for him later in life in the form of depression, which we don't just see by him overdosing on drugs or, the typical way that these stories go for a lot of these musicians. Instead, we have probably one of the most realistic depictions of an anxiety attack I've ever seen put on film, and it's for that reason that this film receives this spot on my list. It struck a personal chord with me. I really saw myself in Bruce Springsteen, as silly as that may sound. And I would highly recommend that those of you who have not seen this film yet watch it as soon as you can, because I certainly cannot wait to see it again. But finally, at number 1, undoubtedly the biggest surprise of this entire year for me, K-pop Demon Hunters. I mean, are you really surprised that my top 3 are all music-related movies? Look, I remember reading the title and thinking, yep, that sounds stupid, I'm gonna pass on this movie. But the masses convinced me So I watched it and was almost immediately won over, not just by the beautifully stylistic animation, like a lot of Sony Animation's recent endeavors, but because of how compelling the story was. Rather than relying on the animation and music in this case to compensate for a lack of substantive storytelling, they use it to enhance the story. The main trio in this film are all funny and well characterized. I think everyone has a different favorite, which is so refreshing to see, rather than everyone unanimously agreeing that one character is the best. Obviously, the music is awesome. The songs are all incredibly catchy, intentionally so, but it's also a thematically rich film. It has a lot to say on the topic of identity and the relief that comes from accepting and expressing your truest self, regardless of the good and bad that comes with that. I think that's a valuable message, not only for children, who are the target demographic for this film, but people of all ages. But what makes me happiest about this film's existence is seeing the massive cultural reach that it has, and how successful it's been on every level, because I think it is completely deserving of every bit of praise it has received. This isn't just another mediocre film like Frozen that became an overnight sensation and refused to go away for over a decade. This movie is really freaking good, and seeing little kids running around on Halloween wearing K-pop Demon Hunter costumes actually put a smile on my face instead of causing me to roll my eyes. If you ask me, this is what every modern family film should strive to be. But with that said, that is it for my 2025 film ranking. I'm happy to say I did get around to watching most of the new films I wanted to this year. There are a few exceptions, like Zootopia 2 and the new Timothée Chalamet vehicle, Marty Supreme, but aside from those, I did see most of what I wanted to see, and aside from the few odd disappointments here and there, I think it was an overall decent year for film. As I said at the beginning of the video, there weren't as many mind-blowing cinematic experiences this year, at least in my opinion, but I'm still optimistic for the future of this medium, and I guess we'll see how things pan out in the coming year. But you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on my 2025 film ranking? Do you agree with any of my placements? Do you disagree with any of them? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day and a happy new year. Take care.